All right, it is a new week in our class, and we are talking about survey and correlational research. So as you look at survey research, that's research where you send out a survey and have people respond to it, whether that's a paper-based or nowadays we're using, of course, a lot more non-paper-based surveys. We're using some technologies to help us to do surveys, which really streamlines the process. And then correlation research is research that is designed to find out relationships between two variables. And so you correlate those two variables to find out more information about them. So those are the different types of research you'll be reading about today, this week, chapters 7 and 8 in the textbook, and then doing the quizzes on those. This week is also a chance to practice your APA in-text citations and references. And so that's the discussion for this week, is you're going to be asked to find an article that you are already familiar with and include a short excerpt from the actual article. Next, include an original sentence that you might write that paraphrases the excerpt, and use proper in-text citation. And then include a quotation from the excerpt of the article with proper APA in-text citation. Finally, include a reference to the article that is APA formatted. So what I will do is go through and kind of look at your posts and grade them. Not grade them, but give you suggestions on how to improve and how to properly cite both in-text and reference citations. Remember that with quotations, you need to have a page number included, but with an in-text paraphrasing, you only need to have the author name and year. And for the reference, there's a lot to include in there, but you have your APA books and APA sources to help you do that. So that's what is going on now, and there's also the preliminary literature review due this week, so that's a big one. You're going to use the annotated reference list that you have been creating as you've read research reports to make a preliminary literature review, and it should include APA formatted narrative writing, categorizing the studies logically, writing flows logically and systematically, and 7 to 10 sources of information or resources. And so it's going to grade you on some of these things. Methods and results from each reference study are adequately presented. So that means tell me a little bit about the methods that the person used to conduct the study, and also what were the results of the study for each one. It should flow well with transitional and organizing sentences and paragraphs, meaning that, it's not all just writing of other people. You have to actually add your own commentary on the sources and discussion in the literature review. The literature review organizes reference studies logically according to focus of studies and results. All right, so generally you want to organize a literature review according to results from studies. You want to compare the different results that studies have given you in your literature review. And so don't just list one study after another. Instead, clump them together a little bit. There's a group of studies that looked at X, Y, and Z, and Smith and so forth looked at this part of X, Y, and Z. By contrast, Jones and Taylor looked at this one. So you kind of compare the studies. You're not just listing studies and what they did and what they found, but you're actually comparing them and contrasting them and putting them together and organizing them in a logical way. I also look for proper APA formatting in all in-text citations, in the document, and also in the references, in the reference list for this assignment. Now, if you are lost, don't know exactly what to do, you can look at these example preliminary literature reviews. There's one on teacher mentoring, one on independent reading in the high school classroom. You can also look under general class items here, and you'll find some example work from the past. These may be some additional examples, or they might be kind of the same. I can't remember. But take a look at those and how they're structured. You'll notice that there are also original writings from my students. So again, you're going to have to do that. You're going to have to write some of the original part of this and talk about the studies in your own words in some parts of it. Most of it will be other authors and telling what other authors and research studies have found, but some of it will be your own words about the overall picture of the research. And that's about it for the literature review. I did want to present a little bit about literature reviews. and then just talk about that. But there is also a proposal description due next week. And this one just basically adds to the literature review. So you'll include your lit review, maybe make some changes based on my feedback that I give you if you have time. And then introduce, so you're going to add an introduction and a statement of the problem and a statement of the hypothesis. So it's not a big assignment once you've done your preliminary literature review, but that is coming up next week as well to be aware of. All right, so let's talk literature reviews a little bit here. So first, you've been looking at different articles per week. I think I have you on the summer schedule, so that's a few more articles per week, looking closer at the subject. But literature reviews generally go from a general subject toward the current study. So in other words, you start kind of general in your literature review, and then you get more specific as time goes by. And you get more specific toward what kind of study you might want to do or present or propose in this class. And so that's the way to do it. So if you were going to talk about, for instance, teacher mentoring, you might first talk about this general idea of teachers being having a hard time with staying in the profession. And then you might get more specific toward possible programs to solve this, and then you might get more specific toward teacher mentoring as one program that really does work for this problem. So again, it goes from general to specific. Another way to think about this is to think about a problem out there in the world, sort of a general issue or problem that's there, and then possible solutions to that problem, and then the one solution to that problem that you are going to be talking about in your assignment or in your proposal. So it gets from general to specific in that way as well. All right, so the organization of your literature review is not a random list of studies. You want to organize it by findings or results. That's the main way that you want to organize it, is what the findings of the studies were. And if there are multiple studies that you have read that have similar findings or tried to look at similar topics or ideas or issues, then you want to make sure those are together in the literature review, not separated into different sections in that review. So here are some key elements to a literature review. It needs to be comprehensive. And that means that you should try to cover all of the literature that's out there that talks about the study or about your area, not just some of it or a little bit of it. Now this is a preliminary one, so how comprehensive it might not be fully comprehensive yet. You'll have a chance to continue on with a bigger literature review later, but it does need to be comprehensive overall. As far as references go, again, the least related to the problem are discussed first, and the most related are discussed last. So again, we're talking about that general to specific guideline there. Literature reviews are a little bit critical, and that means that they briefly describe, analyze, and critique the studies that they are listing. So what they need to do is actually critique a little bit the studies. They might have to say something like, this study lacked a certain quality that probably should have been there, or this study wasn't done as well maybe as it could have been. These are usually very brief. For a single study it might just be a sentence, that's it. But that's usually a part of a good literature review. A literature review compares, contrasts, and summarizes study results. So it doesn't just list what studies have been done and what they found. It compares them to other studies, and that's the original work that you have to do for this. And it contrasts and summarizes study results. So in the end, it's going to summarize and say, okay, overall, what's the picture of the literature right now? And then mostly primary sources. So again, remember, primary sources are those sources that are research reports. And they have a methods section, and they talk about this is someone who actually created their own study and are reporting on that same study. It's not a secondary source. A secondary source is a compilation of studies or a review of a whole bunch of different studies that were done, comparing what happened in the different studies. So you are creating a secondary source, but you need to use primary sources as your primary mode of or primary citation. Now if you have some secondary sources in there, that's usually fine, but it should be mostly primary. Let's see, relevant references only. Okay, so you want to make sure that any studies that you cite in your literature review are relevant to your problem, and you can leave out those ones that are not. And again, remember to have an original summary and interpretation of literature at the end. So after all of the writing is done and you've compared and contrasted the different studies, and you want to end it with a nice summary of what the literature is really saying overall. What does it point toward? And then, of course, correct citations are needed, and those should be cited well. So those are literature review elements. In order to get there, you need to organize your annotated bibliography according to a logical way, which is basically based on the findings of the different studies that are similar, and organize that from general to specific, as I mentioned. Weave the sources together. You're going to summarize, compare, and contrast them, and add original paragraphs to transition from one subject to another. You might say these studies we've just been talking about, might have transitional paragraphs that say we've just been talking about X, Y, and Z. Now we're going to move into studies that have looked at A, B, and C. So you have those transitional paragraphs that you want to add to. Include sufficient information about each study. You might want to have a little description of it, maybe a little critique, but not too much. Each study doesn't have to have a lot. The main thing that you want to say about each study is what the results were, what the findings were from the study. But it is good to describe how they got to those findings a little bit. What were the methods of the study? Was there critique it a little bit too? Was there anything wrong with the study? And then compare and contrast that with other studies. You're going to add an introduction and summary that are original. So that is your own work. You'll add those as you talk about the literature review topics. And that's about it. So, and I just wanted to finish off with just a few of these examples here. I'll go to this independent reading in the high school classroom one. As we look at this, if you look at how the citations are made, in addition, it has been estimated that 75% of inmates in American prisons may be functionally illiterate. So there's a citation right there. Any claims that you make in your literature review should probably have a citation, especially if they're special, if they're claims that you can't substantiate any other way. So Cuevas, Irving, and Russell, 2014. According to Cuevas, Irving, and Russell, 2014, so that's where you'd put the year again, right after if you talk about the authors. And then if you have a quotation, you want to put the page number. There's a lot to talk about. So there's also Dickerson determined her reading program a success, and then they have this Dickerson. Although you might want to say Dickerson 2015 determined her reading program a success, and then remove that one. You wouldn't have to have that one after that point. But if you look at these, you can see some examples of how maybe to cite and how to interweave the different sources. And this one is comparing things like directed independent reading. So all the studies about directed independent reading are going to be listed here in this area. And then it goes to be more, I think, more specific with collaborative reading. So it has all the research studies on collaborative reading and reading systems. It summarizes those. Then it has a conclusion research paragraph or conclusion paragraph that is written by my student. And it gives a good summary of what the research seems to support overall as they have done this work. So it's a good example, I think, of a preliminary literature review, and all the examples that I've included in the class are examples that have scored quite well in the class. Probably not hundreds, but pretty close. So, all right, well, good luck with finishing that up, and have a good week.